I never paid much attention to my wife's car. It wasn't mine, and I never had any reason to care. She was the one who had begged for it last year, a sleek little black sedan with leather seats and a touchscreen dashboard. A car that fits my personality, she had said. She beamed when we drove it off the lot, running her fingers along the steering like it was something precious, something special. I let her have that moment. I didn't care what she drove, as long as she was happy. At first, everything seemed fine. She loved that car, kept it clean, never let a single scratch touch the paint. But then, little by little, problems started popping up. It began with small things, a flickering dashboard light, a weird rattling noise when she braked, the air conditioning not feeling as cold as it should. At first, I didn't think much of it. Cars had problems. That's just how it was. But it kept happening. A few weeks later, she told me the brakes felt off and took it to a repair shop. Then, not long after, she swore the transmission was acting weird. Then the engine started making a funny sound. Maybe it's just bad luck, she'd say with a little laugh. Maybe I drive too much. She said it so casually, like it wasn't a big deal, like I shouldn't be concerned. And maybe I wouldn't have been, except for one little thing. Every single time the car had an issue, she took it to the same mechanic. A guy named Rick. At first, the name didn't mean anything to me. She mentioned it offhandedly. Something about Rick at the shop said it wasn't serious, or Rick took care of it quickly. I figured it was just some guy doing his job. I had no reason to suspect anything. But then the name started coming up too often. If she had a problem with the car, it was always Rick fixing it. If she had a question about the car, it was always Rick who answered it. If she needed an oil change, a tire rotation, even just a damn inspection, it was always Rick's shop she went to. One night, she came home a little later than usual, saying she had to take the car in again. "What is it this time?" I asked, barely looking up from the TV. "Ugh, I don't know," she sighed, dropping her keys on the counter. Some light came on, and I just didn't want to take any risks. You know how these cars are. I nodded, not really thinking about it. Later that night, while she was in the shower, her phone lit up on the nightstand. Normally, I wouldn't have paid any attention. I wasn't the jealous type. I had never been the kind of guy to check my wife's phone, but something about the way it lit up at that exact moment made me glance over. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was something deeper, something in my gut that already knew the truth before I even saw the message. It was from Rick's Auto Repair. I stared at it for a second. That was odd. Most businesses didn't text late at night. But then the screen brightened again, and that was when I saw the picture. A selfie. Some grease-streaked, grinning bastard with stubble on his jaw and an arm covered in tattoos. Lips puckered in a ridiculous air kiss. My fingers curled into a fist, so tight my knuckles cracked. My jaw clenched, the muscles in my neck going rigid. I didn't even have to open the message to know what it was. This wasn't some professional courtesy. This wasn't a simple, "Your car is ready for pickup" text. This was something else. Something ugly. I didn't want to believe it at first. My wife had been acting normal. There had been no fights, no tension, no changes in how she treated me. And yet, there was right in front of me a picture that made my stomach twist and my blood start to boil. I looked at the timestamp. Just a few minutes ago. My mind started racing. Had she seen it yet? Was she expecting it? Was this some kind of joke between them? Or was it worse than that? I glanced toward the bathroom door. The sound of running water filled the bedroom. She was still in the shower, completely unaware that I was staring at what might be the first crack in everything I thought I knew about my marriage. I put the phone back exactly where I found it. Then I sat on the edge of the bed, gripping my knees, my head buzzing with one thought. I was going to find out everything. And when I did, there would be no going back. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft rhythm of my wife's breathing beside me. Every now and then, she shifted in her sleep, letting out a quiet sigh, completely unaware that my mind was burning. My body felt stiff, my fists clenched under the covers. I replayed that image in my head over and over, the grease-streaked bastard puckering his lips at my wife through the screen of my own damn home. Morning came too fast, but I was already awake when the alarm rang. My wife stirred, stretching lazily before turning to me with a sleepy smile. "Morning," she murmured. I didn't respond. I got out of bed, went straight to the bathroom, and splashed cold water on my face. I needed to think. I needed to process. But all I felt was a dull, simmering rage. My hands gripped the sink, my knuckles white. Was this real? I needed proof. Hard proof. That one picture wasn't enough. It could have been a joke. It could have been some weird, stupid inside thing between them that meant nothing. But I knew, deep down in the pit of my gut, that it wasn't nothing. And I wasn't the type to ignore something like this. I walked back into the bedroom. She was already sitting up, scrolling through her phone, probably checking messages, maybe even checking his. "So," she said, glancing at me, "I need to take the car in again today." I stopped. Again? I turned slowly, trying to keep my voice neutral. "What's wrong with it now?" She sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes. "I don't know. Something's making a weird noise when I accelerate. You know, I don't understand this stuff." I stared at her. My wife had never been this careless with a car before. Never. But ever since this Rick guy came into the picture, that thing had been in the shop more than it had been in our driveway. "Maybe I should take a look at it," I said casually, grabbing my coffee mug and taking a sip. "Might just be something small." She laughed a little, shaking her head. "Oh, honey, no offense, but you don't know anything about cars. Rick said he'd check it out for me later." There it was. Rick. I set my coffee down a little harder than I intended. She didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she did and just pretended not to. "I'll drive you," I said. Her head snapped up. "What?" I shrugged. "To the shop. I'll drive you. If the car's acting up, you shouldn't be driving it." She hesitated, just for a second, barely noticeable, but I caught it. "That's sweet," she said, putting on her usual tone, the one she used when she wanted to brush something off without making it seem suspicious. "But I don't want to bother you. You've been so busy with work, and I can handle it. Besides, Rick always takes care of me." I swear I almost crushed that damn coffee mug in my hand. "Rick always takes care of me." The words hung in the air between us. I forced a smile. "Sure, no problem." She got up, kissed my cheek like nothing was wrong, and disappeared in the bathroom. I exhaled slowly. She was lying to me. She wasn't just getting her car fixed. I sat there, gripping my knee, thinking about what to do next. And then an idea hit me. If she was planning to take the car in today, that meant she'd be at the shop at some point, which meant that I, without her knowing, could be there too. I was going to see this Rick guy with my own eyes. Later that day, I left work early, telling my boss I had a personal matter to handle. I didn't care if it sounded suspicious. I had bigger things to deal with. My mind was set, my body tense as I drove toward the auto shop. It was a small place, nothing fancy, tucked away on the edge of town. A big metal sign out front read, "Rick's Auto Repair," in bold red letters. The parking lot was half full, with a few cars waiting for service. I pulled into a spot at the far end, out of sight. And then I waited. A few minutes passed, then a few more. And just when I was starting to wonder if she'd changed her plans, I saw her car pull in. Right on schedule. I watched as she parked near one of the garage bays. The door opened, and she stepped out, smoothing her hair, adjusting her shirt. She looked different, a little too put together for a casual car repair visit. She wasn't dressed for a mechanic's shop. She was dressed for someone. And then I saw him. Rick. He stepped out of the garage, wiping his hands on a rag, flashing her a grin like they were old friends. He was tall, broad-shouldered, covered in tattoos. That same stubble I'd seen in the picture, that same cocky smirk. He said something to her, and she laughed. She laughed. That easy, flirty laugh I hadn't heard in a while. The kind of laugh she used to have for me. My hands clenched around the steering wheel. I felt my blood turn hot in my veins. Then, to make it even worse, I saw him reach out, casual as hell, and touch her arm. That was it. I threw the car door open and stepped out. I wasn't thinking. I wasn't planning. I was just moving. And whatever happened next, I didn't care. I was about to make sure Rick, the mechanic, knew exactly who the hell he was dealing with. I moved fast, too fast to second-guess myself. My boots hit the pavement hard as I stalked across the parking lot, eyes locked on my wife and that grease-covered bastard standing way too close to her. My pulse was pounding, my jaw was tight, and my fingers twitched at my sides. I wasn't thinking about consequences. I wasn't thinking about what would happen next. I was done thinking. I was here to get answers. And if this so-called mechanic had been messing around with my wife, I was going to make damn sure he never forgot me. My wife's back was turned, so she didn't see me coming. But Rick did. His smirk faltered the second his eyes met mine. I watched the way his posture stiffened, the way his fingers instinctively stopped resting on my wife's arm. He knew. Oh, he knew. Hey, babe, did you? My wife started turning around. She froze. I didn't say a word. I let the silence stretch out, thick and suffocating, while my eyes moved between the two of them. I wanted her to feel it. I wanted her to understand exactly what was happening before I even opened my mouth. Her face went pale. Her hands twitched at her sides like she wanted to do something, grab me, calm me down, explain, but she wasn't fast enough. You didn't tell me Rick was such a good-looking guy, I said finally, my voice dangerously even. You talk about him all the time, but you never mention this part. Rick swallowed. My wife let out a nervous little laugh, stepping toward me. Honey, what are you? I ignored her. I took another step forward, closing the space between me and the mechanic. That your usual customer service? Sending selfies to married women. Rick wiped his hands on the rag hanging from his pocket, forcing a chuckle like he thought this was all some big misunderstanding. Hey man, I think there's... Shut up. The words came out sharp and flat, cutting through the air like a knife. His mouth snapped shut. My wife exhaled sharply, shaking her head. Honey, please, you're overreacting. It's not what you think. I turned to her slowly, staring into the face of the woman I thought I knew. Overreacting? She thought I was overreacting? The rage that had been simmering inside me all night suddenly ignited into something hotter, something wilder. I let out a dry laugh, shaking my head. Really? That's the excuse? That's what you're going with? She folded her arms, her face shifting into that defensive look she always got when she knew she was cornered. I don't even know what you're talking about. I bring the car here because Rick is good at his job. That's it. I raised an eyebrow. And the selfies? She hesitated. Too long. Rick, to his credit, didn't say a word. He was smart enough to know he was in dangerous territory. My wife licked her lips, shifting on her feet. It was a joke. I let that word hang in the air. A joke. A joke. Like I was supposed to laugh it off. Like I was the idiot here for thinking anything of it. I took another step forward, and this time Rick took a step back. Let me ask you something, I said, my voice lower now, heavier. How many times has my wife been here in the last 3 months? Rick glanced at my wife like he was waiting for her to answer for him. Don't look at her, I snapped. I ask you. Rick exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw. Look, man, I just fix cars. That's all I do. Wrong answer. I turned to my wife, who was now looking at me like she was actually starting to realize how deep she was in this. How many times? I repeated. I don't know, she said quickly. It's just, cars break down sometimes, you know that. Not this much, I shot back. Silence. And then I saw it. That tiny, almost imperceptible twitch in her expression. The way her lips pressed together for just a second too long. The way her gaze darted away before snapping back. She was lying. I knew it. I stepped back, exhaling slowly through my nose, trying to keep my temper in check. The part of me that had wanted to come here and confront them had done its job. Now a new feeling was creeping in. Something colder. Something worse. Disgust. I had spent years building a life with this woman. I had given her everything, and she had been sneaking around, pretending everything was fine, treating me like some oblivious fool. I turned to Rick, who was still standing there, shifting uncomfortably. You know what? I said, clapping a hand on his shoulder. I'm not even mad at you. Rick looked at me, confused. You're not. I leaned in, lowering my voice. Because at the end of the day, you're just a dumbass mechanic with no self-respect. You see a married woman flirting with you, and you take the bait because you've got nothing else going for you. I patted his shoulder twice before stepping back. You're not the one who stood in front of a minister and made vows. His face darkened, but he didn't say anything. I turned back to my wife. You, though, I said, staring at her. You made those vows, and now you get to live with this. She opened her mouth, but I didn't give her the chance. I turned on my heel and walked away. I didn't look back, because at that moment, I knew 2 things. 1, my marriage was over. And 2, I wasn't going to be the one fighting to fix it. I drove home in silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The rage inside me hadn't faded. It had just settled into something heavier, something that wasn't going to leave anytime soon. My wife had cheated. I didn't need to catch them in bed to know it. I didn't need a confession. That look on her face, that hesitation, the way she had tried so damn hard to downplay everything. I knew. And now that I knew, something inside me felt like it had snapped for good. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't sad. I wasn't broken. I was done. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my decision had already been made. I wasn't going to fight. I wasn't going to beg for an explanation. I wasn't going to play the fool, sitting across from her at the dinner table, pretending we could somehow go back to normal. I was going to end this. An hour later, the door slammed behind her as she walked into the house. I was sitting in the living room, staring at the TV, not really watching anything. I heard her set her keys down on the counter, hesitating like she wasn't sure if she should say something first. Then, after a long pause, she spoke. "Are we really going to do this?" I didn't look at her. "Do what?" I said flatly. She let out a sharp breath, walking toward me. "You know what? This. The silent treatment. Acting like I did something wrong." I turned my head slowly, finally meeting her eyes. I didn't say anything at first. I just let the weight of my stare sit between us, letting her feel it, letting her know she wasn't talking to the same husband she had this morning. "You want me to act like you didn't?" I asked finally. Her arms crossed. She lifted her chin slightly, defensive. "I didn't cheat on you." A slow, humorless chuckle escaped me. "Right. You just let some grease-covered jackass send you flirty pictures and touch his arm like you were a lovesick teenager. You just happened to find a reason to see him every couple of weeks. You just what? Got a thrill out of seeing how far you could push it before I noticed?" "That's not fair," she shot back. "You're twisting things." I exhaled, shaking my head. "No, you twisted things. You twisted our marriage. You twisted my trust. And now you're standing here, trying to twist the truth so you don't have to admit what you did." She looked away, her jaw tightening. "You're being ridiculous," she muttered. I let out a dry laugh, standing up from the couch. Ridiculous? No, ridiculous is what I was. I let it slide for months. I ignored the signs. I let you gaslight me into thinking I was imagining things. Hell, I even believed you when you said the car was just having issues. Her lips pressed together. She wasn't meeting my eyes now. I took a step closer, my voice lowering. "Tell me one thing," I said. "If I hadn't caught on today, if I hadn't shown up, how much further would it have gone?" She swallowed. A flicker of something crossed her face. Guilt? Annoyance? Panic? It didn't matter. "Would you have let him kiss you?" I continued. "Would you have gone to his place next time? Would you have just let it happen and told yourself it wasn't your fault?" She flinched. "I never slept with him," she snapped. I stared at her, long and hard. "You didn't have to," I said quietly. "You betrayed me all the same." Her breath hitched, her arms tightening around herself like she was cold. For the first time, I saw something that almost resembled regret in her eyes. "You're really going to leave me over this?" she whispered. I blinked, and I let out a slow, heavy breath. "Yeah," I said. "I am. The breaking point." She followed me up the stairs, her voice rising. "You're overreacting. You're blowing this way out of proportion. This is crazy." I didn't answer. I walked straight to the bedroom, grabbed a suitcase from the closet, and started shoving my clothes inside. "Stop it," she practically shouted, stepping in front of me. "You're not even giving me a chance to explain." I looked at her, my face unreadable. "You had months to explain. You had every chance. And instead, you made me feel like an idiot." She was breathing hard now, her eyes wide. "It wasn't, Rick wasn't." "Don't." I interrupted, my voice firm. "Just don't. I don't want to hear another damn excuse." She stood there, watching me pack, her hands shaking. I could tell she wanted to grab me, to make me stop, to fix this. But it was too late. I had already checked out. I zipped up the suitcase, grabbed my keys, and turned to leave. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice small now. I paused in the doorway, looking at her one last time. The woman I had loved. The woman who had thrown it all away. "Somewhere you're not," I said. And with that, I walked out. I didn't look back, because this time there was nothing left worth saving. I drove with no real destination in mind, the streetlights blurring past as I gripped the wheel. My phone buzzed in the passenger seat, but I didn't even glance at it. I wasn't interested in whatever last-minute excuse she had cooked up. She had already said everything I needed to hear. I ended up at a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. The kind of place with dim yellow lighting, outdated carpet, and a clerk who didn't ask questions. I paid in cash, got my key, and locked myself in the room. Then I just sat there. The silence was suffocating. I had walked away from my house, my wife, my entire life. And I wasn't regretting it. Not even a little. But now came the hard part. What next? The phone calls began. By morning, my phone had over a dozen missed calls and twice as many texts. My wife, naturally, was at the top of the list. Babe, come home. We need to talk. I swear, nothing happened. Please don't throw everything away over a misunderstanding. I love you. Please answer me. I deleted them all without responding. Then came the second wave. Mutual friends, some of her family members. Her sister, Sarah, left a voicemail. Hey, I don't know what happened, but she's a mess. Just talk to her, okay? You guys can work this out. Work this out. Like this was some minor marital issue. Like she hadn't spent months sneaking off to see some dirtbag mechanic and lying to my face about it. Then, one name popped up that I didn't expect. Rick. I stared at the screen. That bastard actually had the audacity. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text came through. Look, man, I think we got off on the wrong foot. Let's talk. I almost laughed out loud. Wrong foot? Was that what we were calling it now? I didn't respond, but my fingers twitched. I wasn't the type to start fights over text, but if I ever saw him in person again, well, I couldn't make any promises. Instead, I shut my phone off and went back to staring at the motel ceiling. Burning bridges. The first thing I did when I got up was call a lawyer. I had no patience for drawn-out fights or dramatic reconciliations. I wasn't about to be one of those guys who forgave his cheating wife because she cried a little and swore it would never happen again. I wanted this marriage over. Now, the lawyer was a no-nonsense guy, the kind who had seen every messy divorce under the sun. I told him what happened in as few words as possible. He listened, asked a few questions, then told me he'd start the paperwork. That was it. No speeches. No lectures about cooling down or thinking things through. Just the next step. I felt something shift inside me after that call. This was real now. This wasn't just me storming out of the house. This was the end. And then, as if the universe had a twisted sense of humor, my phone rang again. I almost ignored it until I saw the name. Her boss. That was weird. I hesitated, then picked up. Yeah. There was a pause. Then a deep breath. Hey, I'm not sure if I should be telling you this, but I figured you should know. I sat up straighter. Know what? Another pause. Then, finally, your wife called in sick today. But she wasn't sick. I frowned. What are you talking about? The guy hesitated again, like he was trying to find the right words. She came in, acted totally normal, then left early. Said she wasn't feeling well. Except she wasn't heading home. I felt a slow, creeping coldness settle over me. Where did she go? I asked, my voice flat. The answer came immediately. Rick's shop. The final confirmation. I sat in my car outside the auto shop, watching. I don't know why I drove there. Maybe it was morbid curiosity. Maybe it was some part of me that wanted to see it with my own eyes, to catch her in the act, to remove even the smallest shadow of doubt. And then there she was, pulling up in his truck. I recognized it immediately. The same rusted old thing with the dented bumper that had been parked outside the shop yesterday. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my fingers ached. She got out of the passenger seat, laughing at something he said. Laughing. Like she hadn't just spent the last 24 hours begging me to come home. Like she wasn't supposed to be heartbroken over our marriage falling apart. I sat there, watching as she walked inside with him. Not a single hesitation. Not a single glance over her shoulder. She had chosen her side. And now, I was done for good. No more words. I didn't confront her. I didn't march in there and demand answers. I just drove away. Because I finally realized something. I didn't care why she did it. I didn't care about her excuses, her justifications, her promises that it didn't mean anything. She had made her choices. And now I was making mine. When I got back to the motel, I turned my phone back on just long enough to send one final text. You don't need to call anymore. The lawyer will handle everything. I hit send, then blocked her number. Then for the first time in what felt like forever, I let out a slow, steady breath. I was free. The morning after I sent that final text, I woke up to silence. No buzzing phone. No frantic messages. No missed calls. For the first time in years, my life was quiet. And yet, the reality of everything that had happened was starting to sink in. I was done with my wife. I had left. I had called the lawyer. I had set the wheels in motion for a divorce that, in my mind, had been long overdue. But what now? I wasn't the type of guy who spent time thinking about healing or moving on. All I knew was that I wasn't about to sit in a cheap motel forever, waiting for my life to piece itself back together. I needed a plan. The first steps. I took a long, cold shower, letting the water rinse away whatever was left of my old life. By the time I stepped out, I had made my decision. I wasn't going to be the guy who sat around, drinking himself into oblivion, crying over a cheating wife who clearly didn't give a damn. I was going to move forward. Fast. First, I had to get my things. The house was still technically ours, but that wouldn't last much longer. I had no interest in fighting over it. She could have the damn place for all I cared. The memories inside those walls were poison now, anyway. But I wasn't leaving everything behind. So that afternoon I drove back calm, steady, and motionless, back to the house. I half expected her to be there waiting, maybe trying one last time to beg, to explain, to twist things in her favor. But when I pulled into the driveway, her car was gone. Good. The house was eerily quiet as I stepped inside. Nothing had changed except for me. I walked through the rooms like a stranger, ignoring the framed pictures on the walls, the neatly made bed, the little things she had left behind that used to mean something. None of it mattered anymore. I went straight to the bedroom, grabbed a few suitcases, and packed only what I needed: clothes, personal documents, valuables. Everything else? She could have it. Then I spotted my wedding ring on the nightstand. I had taken it off at the motel, leaving it there like it was nothing more than a loose coin. But now, staring at it in our bedroom, something inside me twisted. Not sadness, not regret, just anger. I picked it up, rolled it between my fingers. Then, without thinking, I walked to the kitchen, opened the trash can, and tossed it inside. I didn't hesitate, didn't second-guess it. That part of my life was garbage now. One last surprise. As I was zipping up my bag, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I sighed, so she did come back. I braced myself for whatever speech she had prepared. But when I looked out the window, my stomach dropped. It wasn't just her. It was her and Rick. I watched as they got out of his truck. She was talking fast, gesturing toward the house. He was nodding, arms crossed, like he had any right to be standing on my damn property. Oh, hell no. I yanked the door open before they even had a chance to knock. Turn the hell around, I said before she could get a word out. She looked startled for half a second, but then she squared her shoulders. We need to talk. No, I said, my voice calm. We really don't. She exhaled sharply, frustration flashing in her eyes. Look, I know you're pissed, but don't finish that sentence. I stepped forward, glaring at him now. And what the hell is he doing here? Rick smirked like he thought he had the upper hand. She wanted backup, I guess. My fists clenched at my sides. She brought him here? To our house. The house where we build a life together. The house where I had trusted her, where I had worked my ass off to provide for both of us. And now, she had the nerve to bring her damn boyfriend like this with some kind of business negotiation. You've got 5 seconds to leave, I said, my voice dangerously low. Rick held up his hands, mocking. Relax, man. I'm just here to make sure things stay civil. I took a slow step forward, my body tense. I'll tell you what's civil. You get in the hell off my property before I throw you off. My wife reached for my arm, like she still had some kind of right to touch me. Please, she whispered. Just hear me out. I pulled away. I don't need to hear anything from you. You made your choice. Now live with it. Her eyes filled with something, regret, maybe, or desperation, but I didn't care. She had chosen him. I walked back inside, grabbed my bags, and pushed past them, heading straight to my car. I didn't look back. Not when she called my name. Not when Rick muttered something under his breath. Not when I drove away from that house for the last time. Because this time, I wasn't leaving in anger. I was leaving in control. And that felt a whole lot better. I didn't drive straight to the motel. I needed to clear my head first, to let the weight of what had just happened settle in. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, my pulse still hammering in my ears from the sight of them, standing in my driveway, together. That was the part that burned the most. She didn't just betray me in secret. She wasn't even ashamed enough to hide anymore. She had brought him to my home. The place we built together, the place I worked my ass off to afford, the place where I had once thought we were happy. And that meant one thing. She wasn't just trying to explain herself. She was trying to make me the bad guy. A drink and a plan. I ended up at a bar on the outskirts of town, one of those quiet places where no one asked questions and no one cared about the guy sitting alone with a whiskey glass in front of him. I wasn't the type to drink my problems away, but tonight I let myself have a few. Just enough to take the edge off. Just enough to stop replaying that moment over and over. Her face, her voice, her audacity. Halfway through my second glass, my phone buzzed again. I almost ignored it, but something told me to check. Not my wife this time. Not Rick. Her sister. I debated letting it go to voicemail. But then I remembered. Sarah had been the only one in her family who ever actually seemed to like me. Maybe she knew something. Maybe she was reaching out to warn me about whatever excuse my wife was cooking up. I picked up. Yeah. Jesus, finally, Sarah said. Her voice rushed. Where are you? Why? Because I just found out what happened, and you need to hear this. I swirled my drink, sighing. Unless it's an apology for her dragging Rick into my driveway, I don't care. Sarah hesitated. Then, in a quieter voice, she said, She's planning to fight you on the divorce. I froze. Excuse me? She's pissed, obviously, Sarah went on. She didn't expect you to just walk away so fast. She thought you'd either grovel to fix things or throw a huge fit. But since you didn't, now she's telling everyone that you abandoned her and that you were the problem all along. I exhaled slowly, my jaw tightening. I should have expected this. Of course, she wouldn't just take responsibility for what she did. Of course, she'd twist it to make herself the victim. She cheated, I said flatly. She lied. And now she's trying to play the wounded wife. Yeah, Sarah admitted. And it's working. Half my family is already taking her side. They think you're being cold. They think you're making a mistake by not hearing her out. I let out a humorless laugh. You're telling me that she cheats on me, humiliates me, and now she gets to be the one crying to everyone? Yep. I pinched the bridge of my nose, exhaling. Let me guess. She also told them nothing happened with Rick. Obviously, Sarah scoffed. She's saying you're overreacting, that they're just friends, that you read too much into it. A pause. She's also saying you have a temper, that you scared her when you confronted them. I nearly crushed the glass in my hand. Unbelievable. So let me get this straight, I said, voice tight. She cheats. I find out. I leave. And I'm the bad guy because I didn't play the part she wanted me to. Exactly. I didn't say anything for a long time. Then I downed the rest of my drink, set the glass down, and said, Thanks for the warning, Sarah, but she's not going to win this. Sarah sighed. I hope you're right. Just be careful, okay? Preparing for war. By the next morning, I was in my lawyer's office. The divorce papers were already being drawn up, but now we had a bigger problem. If she was going to try and make me look like the one who ruined our marriage, I needed to make sure the truth was undeniable. I need proof, I told my lawyer. Real proof. Something she can't spin. He nodded, scribbling notes. Bank statements? Text messages? Anything. I never went through her phone, but she was meeting this guy for months. There has to be something. Do you still have access to your joint accounts? I pulled up the banking app on my phone. We had separate credit cards, but we still had a shared account for household expenses. I scrolled through the transactions, and then I found it. Multiple payments to Rick's shop. Not for repairs. Not for car parts. Just vague charges. Hundreds of dollars, spread out over weeks. I turned the phone around, showing my lawyer. He nodded. That's a start. If she can't justify what these payments were for, she's going to have a hard time claiming nothing happened. I sat back, running a hand down my face. She thought she could walk away from this clean. She thought she could cry to her family, spin a story, and win. She was wrong. One last visit. By the afternoon, I was back at the house, this time with a moving truck. I hadn't originally planned to take much, but now I wanted everything that was mine. She was there when I arrived. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, like she had been waiting for me. "So, this is really it?" she asked. I didn't answer. I just walked past her, heading straight to the bedroom. She followed. "You won't even talk to me?" "You didn't talk to me before you started sneaking around," I said coldly. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "You're making this worse than it needs to be." I turned to her, finally looking her in the eye. "No, you made this worse. You lied, you humiliated me, and now you're playing the victim because I didn't let you get away with it." Her face twisted. "I didn't sleep with him." "I don't care." She flinched. "I don't care what you did or didn't do," I went on. "The fact that you even let it get to this point is enough. And now, because I'm not sitting around crying over you, you're running to everyone who will listen and making me the villain." Silence. Then, finally, she whispered, "Are we really done?" I stared at her for a long moment. Then I turned back to my suitcase, zipped it up, and walked past her. Before I left, I stopped at the trash can, reached in, and pulled out my wedding ring. She watched, wide-eyed as I held it up. Then, without another word, I threw in the moving truck, climbed into the driver's seat, and drove away. I never looked back, because this wasn't just a goodbye. This was a final goodbye.